Are you surprised, Judge, we touched on it before this, that he is still sticking it out, that Jeff Sessions is sticking out?
I am
Why
surprised. I am surprised because he has submitted, we believe, 2 letters of resignation, both of which were summarily rejected by the president. And arguably, the president's public criticism today would be the impetus for a third one. But, Neil, I agree with you. I agree with Senator Shelby. I agree with the prevailing legal opinion that the AG had to recuse himself. But it was known before he was appointed Attorney General that the FBI and the DOJ were investigating Russia influence. Right. He probably should have said to then President-elect Trump, I want this job more than anything else, but I don't think I can do it because I think I'm going to be a witness. That would have... He
had to recuse himself, and the president would never have appointed him.
The president would never have appointed him, and all the president's angst that he feels to this very moment would have gone away.
And that's been the bubbling cauldron since, right? Now, this latest issue is taken to task on. What did you make of that?
Well, you know, the IG, the Inspector General, who's begun this investigation, is not an investigation of whether or not crimes are committed, but whether or not DOJ, Department of Justice regulations were violated. This IG is a good guy. Yes, he was there in the Obama administration. He was also there in the George W. Bush administration. He is very much a straight shooter. But this investigation will delay the more serious one, which has teeth to it, an FBI DOJ investigation, by 8 or 9 months to a year. That's what's frustrating to the president.
Dumb question, but you endured many of these from me. Why would the president risk a situation where, let's say he forces Sessions out? Rod Rosenstein would advance in the interim, right? The chances of getting a new attorney general approved anytime soon, I don't think it would happen this year. But the environment would be beyond toxic. So does he think that through? Or?
I do think he thinks that through, and I think he understands that. I think the people around him understand that. I think General Kelly understands that. I think Don McGahn, very, very bright lawyer, who's the president's White House counsel, understands that. And I think the president's lawyers, his personal lawyers, understand that. It would be a flashpoint and would provoke Democrats and moderate Republicans to wonder what is going on between the president's ears that he would fire an attorney general in an environment like this, especially an attorney general whose hands are clean. He may not be doing what the president wants, but there's no professional criticism of Jeff Sessions.
But he must really want this job to put up with this. That is Jeff Sessions. Yes. Or maybe he's just in over his head. What is it?
I believe he is not in over his head. As I mentioned to you earlier on your FBN show this afternoon, I believe by temperament, by experience, by intellect, and by education, he's absolutely qualified to be Attorney General. But he gives the impression that he doesn't belong there or doesn't want to be there.
So all his underlings of any party, do they wonder what's up?
I think they do. I believe the underlings are running the Department of Justice, and the AG is making big policy decisions and giving big policy speeches, but is not managing the day-to-day decisions, not making the, we'll prosecute this person, we won't prosecute that person, the type of decisions that all of his predecessors made. It gives that impression. I hope I'm wrong, because I like him and I want him to succeed, but the impression is out there, and it's not just me. It's in the legal and judicial community at large.
Why, if it looks possible, and I've heard these same reports, that Sessions has offered his resignation at least once, maybe twice, why don't you think the president took it?
Because I think he knows it would be an explosion that he doesn't need. It would add to his political woes and would actually pry loose moderate Republicans in the Senate who are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, would start talking to the Democrats about what are we going to do about this.
The residual damage is what?
Another impetus for impeachment. I hate to say that, but that's what the residual damage would be if Jeff Sessions were to be fired against his will in this environment.
Would you put up with this if you were Jeff Sessions?
I like to think that I would, but I don't know. There are limits to human endurance.